Welcome to Amphipolis, traveler. The city of Amphipolis was the site of one of the more unique battles of the Peloponnesian War. Two generals, the Athenian Cleon and the Spartan Brasidas, fought for this land in an effort to control the resources it provided. In the end, though, neither got what they wanted. Look for me when you finish your visit, and we can speak of what you've learned.
The land that would come to be known as Amphipolis was originally part of Thrace, a region inhabited by formidable semi-nomadic horsemen. Thrace was rich in gold and silver mines. It was surrounded by lush forests, making it very attractive to outside parties like Greece and Persia. By 513 BCE, Persia had managed to conquer much of Thrace. But after their defeat in 479 BCE, Athens made a play for the land. They conquered the nearby island of Thasos in 465 BCE, but the military prowess of the Thracian riders kept them out of the country's interior. It was only in 436 BCE that Athens established a solid foothold in Thrace with the founding of Amphipolis, a city on the banks of the river Strymon. During the Peloponnesian War, the Spartan general Brasidas sought a way to subvert Athenian power across the Greek world. He set his sights on capturing the coast of Thrace, hoping to seize the resources the area provided. Brasidas knew that many of the Greeks living in Thrace hated the greed and brutality of their Athenian neighbors and decided to take advantage of the situation. He set off on an expedition to Amphipolis, accompanied by 1,000 hoplites and 700 helots, and arrived before the city in the winter of 424 BCE. At Amphipolis' ramparts, Brasidas announced that he preferred to take the city peacefully and promised to allow safe passage to any inhabitants who wished to leave, in addition to sparing those who wanted to cooperate. This proposal was well received by the city's residents, and he was able to capture Amphipolis without striking a single blow. Brasidas' march on Amphipolis blindsided the Athenians. By the time they heard the news and dispatched the general Thucydides to defend Amphipolis, Brasidas had already rallied several nearby cities to help him defend the region from Athens' so-called tyranny. After half a day's journey from Thasos, Thucydides arrived at the port of Eion, but was unable to retake Amphipolis. Athens held Thucydides responsible for the loss of Amphipolis. In spite of Brasidas' achievements, Sparta did not send him reinforcements, which forced the general to negotiate a truce with Athens to hold on to the ground he gained. The matter of how to deal with Amphipolis divided Athens. The politician Nicias, as well as the city of Sparta, hoped that peace could be negotiated. However, the popular Athenian statesman and general Cleon wanted to continue fighting the war. Indecision continued until 422 BCE, when Cleon was elected as one of Athens' strategists. This decision made it clear that the city's people were in favor of war. The truce was ended, and Cleon began his journey to Amphipolis, retaking small towns that had been conquered by Brasidas along the way. On arriving at the port of Eion, Cleon requested troops from the king of Macedonia. He also hired several Thracian mercenaries to bolster his force's numbers. Afterwards, all Cleon could do was wait for the remainder of his reinforcements. While they waited, the Athenian forces began to resent Cleon's hesitation to attack. They saw him as soft and incompetent, especially compared to their opponent, Brasidas. Sensing the tension, Cleon decided to act without waiting for reinforcements to arrive. He set out from the port of Eion to observe Amphipolis, setting up a camp on a nearby hill. To Cleon's surprise, Amphipolis appeared to be completely unprotected, with no guards stationed at the city's gates and ramparts. However, the city's lack of protection was only an illusion. Even so, upon seeing this, Cleon regretted that he did not bring wooden towers, which would have allowed him to easily recapture the city. Brasidas positioned his own troops in a nearby wooded area to get a better view of Cleon's army. When the Athenians began moving to set up camp, Brasidas returned to Amphipolis. He believed his army was less well-trained than the Athenians and decided to rely instead on cunning tactics and Cleon's inexperience as a military leader. Brasidas organized a two-prong attack. He would personally lead a small raid, then one of his lieutenants would follow up with a second attack shortly after, disorienting the enemy. He had barely finished formulating his plan when he saw Cleon's army pack up and retreat back towards the coast. The cowardly display made Brasidas realize that perhaps victory would be easier than he thought. After seeing Brasidas' troops return to Amphipolis, Cleon decided to fall back to the port of Eion and once again wait for reinforcements. Unfortunately, his exact orders were confusing and contradictory, which left the Athenian forces in disarray. Brasidas took advantage of this confusion and began his attack. Cleon's forces panicked, which made them easy prey for the Spartans. 600 Athenians were killed, while the Spartans only lost 7 men. Cleon's remaining forces took refuge in Eion, where the bodies of their comrades were eventually returned to them, though only after being stripped of their weapons. During the pitched battle between the Spartans and the Athenians, both Brasidas and Cleon were killed. The reports of their respective deaths reflect how they were perceived as military leaders. We know almost nothing about Cleon's death, other than that he was killed by a Thracian soldier. Brasidas, meanwhile, survived long enough to be taken back to Amphipolis, where he was informed of his victory. He was buried inside the city, which was considered an honor bestowed only upon heroes, and was celebrated as the true founder of Amphipolis. The Battle of Amphipolis temporarily put an end to the hostilities between Athens and Sparta. The Athenian forces returned to Piraeus, while Sparta called back the reinforcements they'd sent for Brasidas. The death of both Brasidas and Cleon encouraged the two cities to push for peace. The negotiations took time, but Sparta and Athens eventually agreed to return to the way things were before the Peloponnesian War. The resulting treaty became popularly known as the Peace of Nicias. Throughout the Greek world, it was mostly agreed that Sparta had lost the war, in spite of Brasidas' heroic efforts. The sentiment was rooted in the fact that Sparta had failed to end Athens' domination over Greece, something they had promised to do at the start of the war.
I see you're done with your tour. The Battle of Amphipolis may have briefly put an end to the Peloponnesian War, but the so-called Peace of Nicias was only temporary. It would not be long before Sparta and Athens came to blows once again. Now, is there something else you'd like to do? Feeling up to a test? Then let us begin. Which Athenian politician wanted to negotiate peace with Sparta? Pericles died in the early days of the war. Try again. Correct. Nicias wanted to build on the truce that was negotiated after Brasidas captured Amphipolis. Now for the second question. Where did Thucydides and Cleon arrive before moving to retake Amphipolis? Where did Thucydides and Cleon arrive before moving to retake Amphipolis? No, Marathon was the site of a famous battle between the Greeks and the Persians. Try another answer. Phaleron was one of Athens' ports. Try again. Yes, Ion is where both Thucydides and Cleon's forces arrived before trying to retake the city. I have one last question for you. Amphipolis was located in which region? Amphipolis was not located in Argolis. Try another answer. No. Amphipolis was not in Thessalia. Try again. Yes, Amphipolis was located in Thrace. It seems there's nothing I can ask that you cannot answer. Congratulations, traveler. Very well. I hope you enjoyed your visit. Welcome to Pylos, traveler. This area, along with the nearby island of Sphacteria, were important battlegrounds during the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War was a great conflict between rivals Sparta and Athens. It lasted many years and cost a great number of lives on both sides. The battles of Pylos and Sphacteria occurred almost one after the other, and culminated with one of the most surprising outcomes in the entire war. But I will not spoil it for you. You'll have to experience it on your own. I'll wait for you at the end of the tour.
Since 431 BCE, the Peloponnesian War had been raging between Athens, Sparta, and their allies, with neither side gaining much ground. But in 425 BCE, an Athenian general named Demosthenes changed that. After a storm forced his fleet to stop in Pylos, Demosthenes realized a military presence in the area would give them an advantage against Sparta. Unfortunately, the fleet's strategists did not believe him, and left Demosthenes in Pylos with 5 triremes and 1,000 men. The Spartans, meanwhile, were too busy celebrating a religious festival to notice the enemy on their doorstep. Once Sparta discovered the Athenian presence on Pylos, the Spartan king Agis mustered his troops and fleet. Sparta then descended on Demosthenes' outpost, attacking from both the sea and the mainland. The Athenian general had to mount a hasty defense. He pulled his boats back to the foot of the ramparts and fixed them in place with stakes, providing extra cover. Then, going against all the established rules of battle, he descended with his hoplites to fight on the rocky shore, where he believed the Spartans would disembark. His gamble paid off, and the Spartans did indeed attempt to land at this location, though Demosthenes' forces made them hesitate. One of the Spartan leaders, Brasidas, decided to make the first move by ramming the rocks with his boat, exclaiming, "It's only a few planks." He paid for his actions when his shield slipped into the sea after descending from his boat, leaving him open to many blows. The battle raged on into the night and continued to the next day, remaining locked in a stalemate. However, on the evening of the second day, Athenian reinforcements arrived. The sudden arrival of the Athenian fleet stacked the odds in Athens' favor. The fleet decided to hold off their attack until the next day, when they swarmed the Spartan ships. They successfully captured 5 enemy ships and damaged many others, cutting off access to the nearby island of Sphacteria. Then, to add insult to injury, the Athenians raised a stake hung with weapons they'd captured from the Spartans, including the shield of Brasidas. Meanwhile, the 420 Spartans on Sphacteria were trapped, and Sparta was completely helpless to rescue them. With 420 of their men trapped on Sphacteria, Sparta needed to reevaluate their position. The Spartans on the island were essentially the Athenians' hostages, and Sparta could not move to rescue or resupply them without putting their lives in danger. In an effort to save the trapped soldiers, the Spartan leadership negotiated an immediate truce with the Athenian strategists. Sparta agreed to hold back its fleet and halt their attacks on Pylos, and in return, the Athenians permitted them to send supplies to their men. In the meantime, Sparta sent ambassadors to Athens to try and negotiate a better deal. The hasty truce greatly humiliated Sparta, as they were forced to recognize just how helpless their infantry was in the face of an Athenian fleet. To bargain for the safety of their men, Sparta sent ambassadors to Athens to propose a cessation of hostilities. The ambassadors tried to emphasize that their situation was not a result of strategic incompetence or lack of strength, but rather plain bad luck. According to them, the Spartans on Sphacteria did not deserve to suffer further, because they were trapped through no fault of their own. These statements provoked the ire of Cleon, a popular Athenian politician known for his populist speeches. Cleon insisted that the terms of negotiations be discussed openly before the assembly and the Athenian people, instead of in private. The Spartan ambassadors were not as comfortable with public speaking as the Athenians, so they decided to leave. Following the failed attempts of the Spartan ambassadors, hostilities resumed. Back in Athens, Cleon took matters into his own hands. After being elected general, or strategos, he left to join the ongoing battle, accompanied by javelin-armed infantry and archers. With renewed strength and numbers, the Athenians landed on Sphacteria and engaged their enemy. The battle was hard fought, but they eventually managed to surround the remaining Spartans. It was then that Cleon invited the Spartans to surrender, as he hoped to return to Athens with prisoners. The Spartans were exhausted after spending 72 days on the island, so they accepted Cleon's offer and laid down their arms. A Spartan capitulation had previously been unheard of, and the news of their surrender echoed throughout Greece like thunder. The Spartans' capitulation completely changed the course of the Peloponnesian War. Athens used their new prisoners of war as leverage and threatened to execute them if Sparta ever returned to pillage their lands. This gave the Athenians the freedom to conduct their own raids, which were aided further by their eventual seizing of the island of Cythera. Sparta tried to negotiate for peace, but were unsuccessful. Cleon, meanwhile, was emboldened by his victory and continued to gain popularity with the Athenian people, popularity that translated to power.
I hope you enjoyed learning about the battles of Pylos and Sphacteria. The battles were hard fought by both sides, but Athens' victory gave them an enormous boost in morale. It encouraged them to be more aggressive, and it was some time before Sparta recovered from the aftershocks of their historic surrender. Now, is there anything else you'd like to do? I will say farewell. Though I hope our paths will cross again someday. Welcome, traveler, to the ruins of Mykine. These are the ruins of Mykine, center of the old Mykinean civilization. It was home to great warriors and heroes. In many ways, places like Athens and Sparta stand on the shoulders of its accomplishments. This tour will take you through its ruins and introduce you to its most important monuments, revealing its history in the process. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
The Mycenaean civilization flourished in the Late Bronze Age between 1600 and 1200 BCE. During this period, it was mainly located in the Peloponnese and central Greece. Mycenaeans were known for exploring distant lands. Notably, they battled the Hittite allied city of Walusa in a conflict that was believed to be the inspiration for Homer's Trojan War. But the Mycenaean people didn't only travel to fight. They learned much from their neighbors, the Minoans of Crete, such as how to write syllabic script on clay tablets. Such tablets provide evidence that Mycenaeans spoke an early form of Greek. They also tell of how great Mycenaean kings ruled over their warriors from opulent palaces in places like Mycenae, Thebes, and Knossos. The entrance to Agamemnon's citadel, or the Lion Gate, is one of the most iconic monuments in Mycenae. It is impressive for both its height and for the intimidating rendering on its relief, which depicts two lions standing on either side of a column. Unfortunately, The lions' heads, which were presumably made of a precious metal or higher quality stone, have been lost to time. The gate was most likely meant to greet a triumphant king returning home from successful military campaigns and to awe foreign visitors. When these shafts were discovered by archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann in 1876, he believed the 6 gold-filled graves to be connected with the family of the great king Agamemnon, even going so far as to proclaim a gold mask he found within to be the death mask of Agamemnon. However, this was refuted by later excavations, which showed that the 19 bodies buried in the shafts dated back to a few hundred years before Agamemnon was even born. In fact, at the time of the body's burial, the Lion Gate and the citadel walls had not even been built yet. It's estimated that the people in the graves were members of the first Mycenaean dynasty. The graves later became a place of worship for Mycenaean kings, who raised walls to protect them. These walls helped preserve several incredible artifacts, including women's jewelry, death masks, and masterfully crafted weapons. By 1250 BCE, Mycenae was at the height of its power, and its living quarters and workshops were numerous. Houses were built everywhere, from the top of the palace's hill near the king's residence, to the slopes and terraces within the walls, to the nearby hills outside the citadel. At one point, the citadel's walls even had to be enlarged to make room for more quarters. The people who lived inside the citadel were those with high status in either the military, religious, or administrative sectors of the kingdom. This is reflected by the ceramic and metal vessels inside the houses, as well as their painted plastered walls. A traveler seeking an audience with the king would have first ascended a steep ramp from the Lion Gate to the Citadel's summit. Here, they would have walked into the palatial complex through a grand entrance called the Propylon. Once inside, their gaze would immediately be drawn to the palace's main hall, a monumental area known as the Megaron. The vividly decorated Megaron, which glittered with precious objects and colorful frescoes in its heyday, was where the king would have received the traveler. If the king was feeling generous, he would have shared with the visitor the palace's most marvelous feature, its commanding and majestic view, which stretched from the plain of Argolis to the gleaming Aegean Sea. It was in this palace where a legendary Mycenaean king like Agamemnon would have held court. According to Homer and other poets, Agamemnon led the Greeks in the sack of Troy. Stories say that he was a fearsome warrior on par with Achilles, but also an overly ambitious and arrogant ruler. He sacrificed his own daughter, Iphigenia, to convince Artemis to grant his ship's passage to Troy. After conquering the city, he returned to Mycenae with mounds of riches, and a Trojan named Cassandra as his concubine. Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, was not pleased with her husband's sacrifice of their daughter. She plotted to murder her husband out of anger. The plot was successful, and, depending on the version of the story, Agamemnon was either murdered in his bath by Clytemnestra or killed by his cousin Aegisthus during a banquet.
You've completed the tour. I trust it was an eye-opening experience. Though it did not last, Mycenae was a sort of precursor to what would eventually become the Greek civilization we know today. It's important we remember them, if only to avoid repeating their mistakes. Now, what else would you like to do? Then, I suppose this is farewell. At least for now. Safe travels.
αδελφός λέγει κοσμήματα δυνάμενος φέρει εις το άρτιον τιμιέντα. Αλλά εμπόρω δείτε, ή μεταπράττει.
Welcome, friend, to this especially sacred part of the Olympian sanctuary. The sanctuary of Olympia was dedicated to Zeus, king of the gods. It had close connections to the divine, as you will see very soon. I'll come find you when you're done, and we can talk about what you've learned.
This workshop was built for the renowned sculptor Phidias after his work on the Acropolis of Athens. In 435 BCE, Phidias came to Olympia to begin working on the great chryselephantine statue of Zeus. He died 5 years later, shortly after completing his masterpiece. This grand statue would become one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Phidias's workshop was located right next to the Temple of Zeus. Its structure has been well preserved, mostly owing to its conversion to a church in the 5th century CE. Archaeologists have also discovered lots of ancient materials in the surrounding area, such as casting molds and sculpting tools. The most famous artifact, however, is a cup bearing an inscription that aggressively states, "I belong to Phidias." On the 5th and final day of the Olympic Games, victors attended a ceremony where they were crowned with olive wreaths and showered in flowers. The crowns came from the sacred olive tree of Zeus, which was planted near the god's temple. A young boy trimmed the branches with a golden sickle before giving them to the Hellanodikai to turn into wreaths. After the crowning ceremony, it was time for great feasting and celebration.
Λαμβάνει η χώρα. Ήρθε τον εκπληκτικό να πει. Βεβαίως το διδάσκαλος στο στοιχείο και διδάξιμο.
Όχι, ήκουσα την αλήθεια να δάσκουν και το πρότερα. Μέλησε την περιτιδάβος.
Αρούν τις τεχνολογίες εξήγησης. Σως πατήρης θα ανέσχυτος κλέψει σύμφωνο. Όποτε απαιτειρά μου κολλήσω μια κάμη του λέγον είναι συμφωνηβάριο. Ιούσι διαφόρος. Επίον και σε αλήθειες.
Αληθέσιστη.
Pelops was both a legendary Greek hero and the mythical founder of the Olympic Games. According to legend, Pelops fell in love with the beautiful Hippodamia. Her father, Oenomaus, the king of Pisa, disapproved of their union. Having once heard a prophecy that he would be killed by his son-in-law, Oenomaus was known to challenge his daughter's suitors to chariot races, killing them when he won. Still, Pelops was determined to win Hippodamia's heart. Before the race, he enlisted the help of Poseidon, who gave him a golden chariot with 4 winged horses. Pelops was able to win both the race and the hand of his beloved, while Oenomaus was dragged to death by his horses. The start of this famous race was depicted on the eastern pediment of the Temple of Zeus. The Heraion was a temple dedicated to Hera. It is one of the oldest temples in the sanctuary, dating back to approximately 590 BCE. The structure included columns painted with images of women who won the Heraia, an athletic competition made up of running events. Every 4 years, 16 women were chosen to make a veil dedicated to Hera. These women also organized the competition, though they did not compete in it. The Heraia was unique for its focus on female athletes, in contrast to the male-exclusive Olympic Games. Hera was the goddess of women, marriage, family, and childbirth. She ruled Mount Olympus as Queen of the Gods, along with her husband and brother Zeus. Many mythological stories paint her as being annoyed at Zeus's many lovers and illegitimate offspring. In Greek art, Hera is usually depicted as matronly and regal, often wearing a crown or sitting on a throne. She is also sometimes seen holding a pomegranate, a symbol of both fertility and death. Hera's cult was very popular across Greece, and Olympia even minted her image on its coinage.
Πώς γέγητάτε ορόνσε.
One of the highlights of the Olympic Games was a ceremony that took place on the third day of the festival. It began with a procession of athletes, ambassadors, Hellenodikai, and animals. The group made their way around the Altis until they arrived at the Temple of Zeus. Then the animals were brought in front of the altar of Zeus and offered as a sacrifice. This sacrifice was known as a hecatome, a word that originally described the sacrifice of 100 oxen. During the hecatome, the bones and legs of the animals were burned and carried to the top of a mound of ashes from previous sacrifices. Meanwhile, the meat of the animals was saved for a large banquet held later in the evening. The Olympic Games were dedicated to Zeus, and all the ceremonies and events were hosted in his honor. It is no surprise that the largest temple in the sanctuary was the Temple of Zeus. While most temples were restricted to priests, the Temple of Zeus welcomed all who visited Olympia. This openness was most likely meant to show off the gold and ivory statue of Zeus that stood within the temple's walls. The building also featured art depicting both versions of the Olympic festival's founding myth. The eastern pediment showed a scene from the legendary race between Pelops and Oinomaos. The temple's metapiece, meanwhile, showed the 12 labors of Heracles, the other mythical founder of the games.
περσέ μία πίτνους αναμένουσα τον έκη.
Κοινίο πρεσβύτερο, πέντε και άπαντα αφήνεται.
Της κρύωδο ότι εγώ εσύ τούτο το δώρο αυτής του τάφου.
Προσεδέκτητά τα προσκάρεις και νυν τέας.
Αδύνατον
Ο
εσύ.
οίκος πιέστη η πίστη, σημέντο σου το προσδετείς.
Οίκου εσάν, η γάτη μου ευλογνώμησε νικίαν και δούλους παραθείο αυτής.
Ο σύλλης δεν θα πληθώ αέσθητο του ανδρός.
Εκοιμούμεν την ερήτων. Ιούτες γεννήσετε, τέλος γάμου έστε.
Αλλά μου, ετεροδίο, αγαπά τον αλλήλο.
Περί αγάπης ούτωπος. Ο πλούτος αυτής δι προστατευτείτε.
Διαλέγομαι έναν τούτο άλλο τύπο, μάλλον διαλέγω.
Εν φάδες μένω.
Ναι, δεν φάτε εσείς.
Άπασες σπάβο τότε. Προσέπειτε εντός του οίκου.
Κληρονόμησες της μητρός την ουσίαν και λέγεις μη ως περξένα.
Ήξεντος, τι ήστα όταν η μήτηρη πλημμύρης.
Ουχίος περσέ μία πίτνους αναμένουσα τον έκη.
Κοινίο πρεσβύτερος, πέντε και άπαντα αφήνεται.
Της κρύωδο ότι εγώ έστει τούτο το δώρο αυτής εξ τάφου.
Αυτή προσεδέκτητά τα προσκάρεις και νυν τέας.
Και ο οίκος πιέστη η πίστη, σημέντο σου το προσδετεί.
Πώς γεννάτε ορόσε.
Αληθέσεις της. Κατανοώ ότι θέλεις να συναντήσει με εκεί.
Αλόκοτον
Ναι,
τα
όμως
μάτια.
γάμωσες τι, επιχείρησης της.
Οίκου εσάν ότι η φυγάτη μου εκληρονόμησε νικίαν και δούλους παραθείο αυτής.
Ο σύντης δεν θα πληθώ αέσθητο του ανδρός της.
Επιθυμούμεν την ερήτων. Ιούτες γεννήσετε, τέλος γάμου έστε.
Αλλά όμως ετεροδίο, αγαπά τον αλλήλο.
Περί αγάπης ούτωπος. Ο πλούτος αυτής δι προστατευτείτε.
Διαλέγομαι έναν τούτο άλλο τύπο, μάλλον διαλέγω.
Ήξεντος, τι ήστα όταν η μήτηρη πλημμύρης.
Ουχίος περσέ μία πίτνους αναμένουσα τον έκη.
Κοινίο πρεσβύτερος, πέντε και άπαντα αφήνεται.
Της κρύωδο ότι εγώ έστει τούτο το δώρο αυτής εξ τάφου.
Αυτή προσεδέκτητά τα προσκάρεις και νυν τέας.
Και ο οίκος πιέστη η πίστη, σημέντο σου το προσδετεί.
Εν φάδες μένω.
Ναι, δεν φάτε εσείς.
Άπασε εις σπάβο τότε. Προσέχετε εντός του οίκου.
Κληρονόμησες της μητρός την ουσίαν και λέγεις μη ως περξένα.
Ήξεντος, τι ήστα όταν η μήτηρη πλημμύρης.
Ουχίος περσέ μία πίτνους αναμένουσα τον έκη.
Κοινίο πρεσβύτερος, πέντε και άπαντα αφήνεται.
Της κρύωδο ότι εγώ έστει τούτο το δώρο αυτής εξ τάφου.
Αυτή προσεδέκτητά τα προσκάρεις και νυν τέας.
Και ο οίκος πιέστη η πίστη, σημέντο σου το προσδετεί.
Οίκου εσάν ότι η φυγάτη μου εκληρονόμησε νικίαν και δούλους παραθείο αυτής.
Ο σύντης δεν θα πληθώ αέσθητο του ανδρός της.
Επιθυμούμεν την ερήτων. Ιούτες γεννήσετε, τέλος γάμου έστε.
Αλλά όμως ετεροδίο, αγαπά τον αλλήλο.
Περί αγάπης ούτωπος. Ο πλούτος αυτής δι προστατευτείτε.
Διαλέγομαι έναν τούτο άλλο τύπο, μάλλον ιδιωτικό.
Πώς γεννηθάτε ορόσε.
Αληθέσεις της.
Κατανοώ ότι θέλεις να συναντήσει με εκεί.
Ναι, όμως γάμωσες τι, επιχείρησης της.
Οίκου εσάν ότι η φυγάτη μου εκληρονόμησε νικίαν και δούλους παραθείο αυτής.
Ο σύντης δεν θα πληθώ αέσθητο του ανδρός της.
Επιθυμούμεν την ερήτων. Ιούτες γεννήσετε, τέλος γάμου έστε.
Αλλά όμως ετεροδίο, αγαπά τον αλλήλο.
Περί αγάπης ούτωπος. Ο πλούτος αυτής δι προστατευτείτε.
Διαλέγομαι έναν τούτο άλλο τύπο, μάλλον ιδιωτικό.
Ήξεντος, τι ήστα όταν η μήτηρη πλημμύρης.
Ουχίος περσέ μία πίτνους αναμένουσα τον έκη.
Κοινίο πρεσβύτερος, πέντε και άπαντα αφήνεται.
Της κρύωδο ότι εγώ έστει τούτο το δώρο αυτής εξ τάφου.
Αυτή προσεδέκτητά τα προσκάρεις και νυν τέας.
Και ο οίκος πιέστη η πίστη, σημέντο σου το προσδετεί.
Οίκου εσάν ότι η φυγάτη μου εκληρονόμησε νικίαν και δούλους παραθείο αυτής.
Ο σύντης δεν θα πληθώ αέσθητο του ανδρός της.
Επιθυμούμεν την ερήτων. Ιούτες γεννήσετε, τέλος γάμου έστε.
Αλλά όμως ετεροδίο, αγαπά τον αλλήλο.
Περί αγάπης ούτωπος. Ο πλούτος αυτής δι προστατευτείτε.
Διαλέγομαι έναν τούτο άλλο τύπο, μάλλον ιδιωτικό.
Ήξεντος, τι ήστα όταν η μήτηρη πλημμύρης.
Ουχίος περσέ μία πίτνους αναμένουσα Περσένα.
Ήξερε, μίλησα όταν είμαι κηρύκου ημέρης.
Ο θείος Περσέν μία πίθος αναμένουσα τον έκη.
Μείο πρεσβύτερος, πέτει και άπαντα αφήνεται.
Της κρύονται ότι εγώ έστειλω το δώρο αυτής της τάφου.
Αυτή προσεδέκτητά στα προσχάρη και μην θέας.
Και ο οίκος τι έστειλε πίστη, σημαίνει το σου το προσδετεί.
Πώς γέγηθα θεωρών σε
Αληθέσεις.
κατανοώ ότι θέλει να συναντήσει με εκεί.
Ναι, όμως γάμος συστή, επιχείρησης τι.
Ήκουεσαν ότι η φυγάτη μου εκκληρονόμησε νικίαν και δούλους παραθείο αυτής.
Ως ήθιστε τα πρικόα έστειλε του ανδρός της.
Επιτιμούμεν την ερήφα. Μη θεσμίσετε, τέλος γάμου έστε.
Αλλά όμως ετεροδίο αγαπά τον αλήθεια.
Περί αγάπης ούτοπος. Ο πλούτος αυτής διπροστατευτεί.
Διαλέγαμε έναν του το άλλο του. Μάλλον
Ήξερ, μίλησα όταν είμαι κηρύκου ημέρης.
ο θείος Περσέν μία πίθος αναμένουσα τον έκη.
Μείο πρεσβύτερος, πέτει και άπαντα αφήνεται.
Της κρύονται ότι εγώ έστειλω το δώρο αυτής της τάφου.
Αυτή προσεδέκτητά στα προσχάρη και μην θέας.
Και ο οίκος τι έστειλε πίστη, σημαίνει το σου το προσδετεί.
Πώς γέγηθα θεωρών σε
Αληθέσεις.
κατανοώ ότι θέλει να συναντήσει με εκεί.
Ναι, όμως γάμος συστή, επιχείρησης τι.
Ήκουεσαν ότι η φυγάτη μου εκκληρονόμησε νικίαν και δούλους παραθείο αυτής.
Ως ήθιστε τα πρικόα έγινε του ανδρός της.
Επιτιμούμεν την ερήφα. Μη θεσμίσετε, τέλος γάμου έστε.
Αλλά όμως ετεροδίο αγαπά τον αλήθεια.
Περί αγάπης ούτοπος. Ο πλούτος αυτής διπροστατευτεί.
Διαλέγουμε έναν του το άλλο του. Μάλλον
Ήκουεσαν ότι η φυγάτη μου εκκληρονόμησε. Επιτιμούμεν την ερήφα.
η εργασία διάνελα το τι είναι ικανός.
Zeus was the god of sky and thunder, and king of the Olympians. He ruled the world from his home on Mount Olympus. The child of Cronus the Titan, Zeus overthrew his father and cast the Titans out in a great battle known as the Titanomachy. He had children of his own with his wife Hera, including Ares, Hephaestus, Hebe, and Eileithyia. He also had many children without Hera, much to her consternation. But there are too many to list here. Zeus was believed to have control over the lives of mortals, as his many epithets attest to. For example, his title Horkios made him a keeper of oaths, while Xenios was the name conferred to him as a protector of hospitality. In Greek art, Zeus was usually depicted holding a thunderbolt and sitting on a throne, befitting his position as king. The Temple of Zeus was home to the chryselephantine statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The statue, made of gold, ivory, and wood, was sculpted by the renowned artist Phidias. At 13 meters tall, it was as impressive looking as it was difficult to maintain. Oil was used to protect the wood and ivory from cracking and to prevent general decay. While the statue does not exist today, it was thankfully described by Pausanias in great detail, so its legacy lives on.
Hello again. I hope you enjoyed your visit and feel a little bit closer to the gods. Well, as close as a mortal can get. Is there anything else you'd like to do? Farewell for now, my friend.
Αληθές είστε.
Κατανοώ ότι θέλει να συναντήσει με εκεί.
Ναι, όμως γάμο, σωστή επιχείρηση.
Greetings, wanderer, and welcome to the Agora of Athens. The Agora is the beating heart of any Greek city. It is a place where all types of people may gather, from citizens and foreigners to magistrates and philosophers. All manner of business is conducted here, including political meetings, legal proceedings, and trade. When you finish exploring, come find me, and we can talk more. See you soon, wanderer.
The Agora was the civic center of Athens, but it wasn't only frequented by politicians and city officials. The area housed a market where people could purchase food and other goods from merchants. It was also frequented by philosophers who used the public space to establish schools and pass on their teachings to students. Religion had its place as well. Temples dedicated to Hephaestus and Apollo were located in the Agora, along with the altar of the 12 gods and the monument of the eponymous heroes.
Μόνο όταν το επιχείρημα δομείται πιστικών, τότε δύναται να
The painted stoa, or stoa poikile, derived its name from the panel paintings on its wall. The paintings were created in the 5th century BCE by famous artists like Polygnotus and depicted Greek military victories like the Battle of Marathon. The Stoa served as a public meeting place for citizens, but it was especially popular with philosophers who used the space to pass on their teachings. In 301 BCE, the philosopher Zeno of Kition chose the Stoa Poikile as the location for his school of philosophy, the appropriately dubbed Stoicism.
Χρώμεθα το παραδείγμαζε των έργων αυτού, την αμφιβάλλομαι το δέον γενέστε εις τεινάς συλλογισμών, αλλά της θέμηδος ναός ούκ εστί πανήγη.
Είναι ασταθή εν επιχείρημα 2 ώρες.
Κοινός και ο Κίον,
Trade in the agora was supervised by magistrates. There were 5 agoranomoi who kept order in the market, controlled the quality of goods, and collected market dues. This provided revenue to the city and helped pay the magistrates and those in charge of maintaining order. The market benefited everyone. Customers bought what they needed, merchants made their living, and city officials received the money they needed to keep the wheels of democracy turning. The original temple of Apollo Patros was built around 535 BCE by Pisistratos, but was destroyed by the Persians during their invasion a few decades later. It long remained in ruins, except for the altar, which was left standing as a reminder of the Persian sacrilege. Eventually, a new temple was built in the 4th century BCE. Inside was a statue made by Euphranor, the same artist who painted in the Stoa of Zeus. The temple held special significance in Athens, as it was connected to the origin of the city's people. The name Patros, meaning fatherly, referenced the belief that Apollo was the father of Aeon, founder of the Ionian Greeks, from whom all Athenians are descended. The Temple of Hephaestus overlooks the Agora from the Colonus Agoreus hill. Today it is one of the best preserved temples in Greece, owing to its conversion to a church in the Middle Ages. But while this transformation preserved the structure, it also damaged the surrounding sculptures. The temple was dedicated not only to Hephaestus, the god of metallurgy, but also to Athena Ergane, goddess of arts and crafts. Nearly every part of the Hephaestion was lavishly decorated with depictions of famous mythological events, like the labors of Theseus. The Theseus scenes gave the temple the nickname Thesion, a name that lives on today as a city district in Athens. The Boulaterion was another building in the Agora that contributed to the democratic process. It housed the Athenian Council of Citizens, the Boulé. This council of 500 was composed of 50 members from each Greek tribe, all of whom served a one-year term. They were chosen by lot from among citizens over 30. Every month, one group of 50 was chosen to lead the Boulé's executive committee, the Prytaneis. The Prytaneis met every day of the month and called meetings of the full council in the Boulaterion, where they spent their time discussing bills. The Prytaneon was one of the most important buildings in the Agora, as it was the headquarters of the Prytaneis. The Prytaneis was the executive committee of the Boulé, who ran the city's daily operations. The Prytaneis dined in the Prytaneon, and 17 of them slept on site to ensure there were always officials available to deal with emergencies. The Prytaneon also housed the official weights and measures of the city. The Fire of Hestia, which provided sacred fire for all public sacrifices, was also located there. The Heliaia was the most important court in Athens and was presided over by a group of judges called Heliasts. Judging was a regular part of an Athenian citizen's life, with trials happening almost every day. Heliasts were chosen randomly based on two factors. First, that they were on the official list of 6,000 potential Heliasts. Second, that they were present at court on the day of the trial. A stipend of 2 obols was established by Pericles to compensate for the loss of work while on Heliast duty, and also to encourage participation in the judiciary process. In the Agora, an Athenian could buy and sell many different products. The permanent retail market was divided into sections according to the category of merchandise. Merchants and craftsmen who worked in the market could be citizens, foreigners, or even freed slaves. They sold everything from food and clothes to jewelry and slaves. With so much variety, competition was fierce, and that competition helped regulate the market's prices.
Από τις θαλάσσιες πόλεμος απαξεί τα εμπορεύματα εκ του Ευξήνου.
Κρέας γίνεται φέ, κάκιος και πολλό κάτι είναι. Έκαστος κρεοπόλης λέγει το αυτό. Τι έστε το χάρη.
The Heliaia wasn't the only court in Athens. This other court was located next to the South Stoa. Historians believe it to be a court based on the discovery of a nearby box containing 7 bronze ballots. These ballots were used by jurors to give their verdicts. The reason trials were so common in Athens might have been related to their democratic regime, which promoted the individual's right to demand reparations for injustice. However, not all legal matters were settled in this fashion. If a claim was small enough, it was settled individually by a magistrate. Public trials were reserved for more serious offenses, such as murder, theft, and political crimes.
Κρέας γίνεται φε, κάκιον και πολλοκάκιον έτη. Έκαστος κρεοπόλης λέγει το αυτό. Τι έστε το κάλλιστον πάλι πότε κρέας. Οι αγρότες φοβούνται μη φέρους αυτά εμβολιασμού.
The mint was where the city made its coinage. It is believed that Athens' mint was in the city's agora, as modern excavations have turned up small disc-shaped pieces of metal used to make coins. Much of the silver required for minting coinage came from the Lavrion silver mines. Athens was so dependent on the mines that when they lost them during the Peloponnesian War, the city was forced to melt down a gold statue of Athena to mint gold coins and avert a monetary crisis.
Μεταξύ των σιτίων και η της αποθήκης θηράνε εωγμένη.
Η απαθή!
You have now experienced the Agora, following in the footsteps of countless Athenians before you. I hope the trip has impressed upon you how important this place was to trade, politics, and law. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Farewell, wanderer. May we see each other again soon.
Έτσι αν σε μας τυχούνενε καθούλος, τα ημέτερα σιτία εδίδενται. Αντακαίων τάραχος και λευκός προσφάλιν, ακυπησίους, αληθίνους, σκόμπρους και τρίγλας εξ ευσύνου πόντου. Έχομεν ταρικίους ευθύς εκ πόντου όπως γάμους επιχειρήσεις άπαντα αλλά όμως εταίρον διόταν περί ανάποσου τόπος.
Here, visitor, and welcome to this sacred site. My name is Herodotus, and I am a traveler from Halikarnassos. I retrace the cause of various events, such as wars and great calamities. I describe what I see and record what I'm told, all with the aim of providing a better understanding of why these things occur. Look for me to introduce you to many sites. This is Delphi, home of the renowned oracle. Greeks considered it the navel of the world. Pilgrims and kings journeyed here from all over Greece and beyond, seeking advice from Apollo through the voice of his interpreter, Pythia. During your visit, you will experience the sanctuary through a pilgrim's eye and discover how important oracles and prophecies were to the people of Greece. Now, go off and begin your pilgrimage. I will be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
On their journey to the Temple of Apollo, pilgrims walked this sacred path up Mount Parnassus. The summer sun beat down hot on their backs. Along the way, they took in the magnificent monuments, treasuries, and statues that adorned the road. These landmarks were tokens of people's reverence for the oracle's benevolence. All were dedicated to Apollo, and most were offered by cities to commemorate military victories. The monuments represented not only their donors' piety, but also their power and wealth. The sanctity of Delphi has endured to the present day, and visitors still take this very same route. One of the most impressive dedications to Apollo came from the Cnidians, a Greek population that colonized the island of Lipari, north of Sicily. The story behind this dedication is notable. The Cnidians were at war with the Etruscans in the Tyrrhenian Sea. Seeking a good omen, the Cnidians consulted the oracle, and following her advice, they successfully captured 20 enemy ships. To thank Apollo, they offered the god the same number of statues as ships seized.
Οι χαρακτήρες εν τες τραγωδίες
Next to the Naxian Sphinx stood a simple structure to display offerings from the Athenians, most of which were spoils of war. In particular, these offerings, called ex-votos, were prows of sunken Persian ships. The Athenians built the portico after their naval victory over the Persians in 478 BCE.
λέγει ιδέο άνθρωπος και ιδέ το δέο
Once arriving before the temple, pilgrims wishing to consult the oracle had to first pay a tax. This tax gave them the initial right to approach the altar of Apollo and make an animal sacrifice to the god. But before proceeding to the Pythia, the preliminary ritual had to succeed. If the animal reacted favorably and showed signs of acceptance to the god, it was sacrificed, and the pilgrim would be allowed to enter the temple to question the Pythia.
Προαιρούνται του ύψους της διανοίας Ένεκεν. Τραγωδία εκλαμβάνητας ιστορίας αυτών και χρείται ταύτας τραγωδοποιού Ένεκα. Ούτως ούκ αντιμιμείται τα σπουδαίας αξίας των ιστοριών τούτων. Τουναντίον, επιμηχάνεται ταύτας και προσμυθοποιεί. Αποκρίσει.
At last we arrive at the Temple of Apollo, where the oracle relayed her prophecies. The temple was the final destination of those seeking an audience with the Pythia, and its appearance matched the majesty of its purpose. Atop its imposing columns, the structure's pediment displayed famous mythological scenes sculpted by the renowned Greek artist Antenor. But as grand as the temple looked from the outside, it paled in comparison with what happened within. Prophecies were given in the most restricted part of the temple, the adytum, by a chaste woman known as the Pythia. Before delivering prophecies, she first purified herself with water, then burned laurel leaves and barley flour to begin the ritual. Finally, while seated on a tripod surrounded by offerings, the Pythia delivered Apollo's messages. Her words were often strange and indecipherable, and required further interpretation by the temple's priests. Despite much research, the exact causes of the oracle's behavior while prophesying are debated to this day. Myths say that while searching for an oracle who could impart their words to mortals, Apollo established a sanctuary on Mount Parnassos. Apollo took over this site by slaying its sinister guardian, the snake-like python.
Your visit is complete. I hope you now understand how important this sanctuary was, and how it affected the lives of people both in the Greek world and beyond its borders. To be honest, I could speak about Delphi all day. But what would you like to do now? As you wish. It has been a pleasure sharing Delphi with you.
Greetings, wanderer, and welcome to the port of Piraeus. Act acting as a port for Athens, Piraeus welcomed merchants, goods, and travelers from all over the world. It was a central part of Athens' economy, but it was also fortified enough to protect the city's considerable fleet. When you finish exploring the port, find me, and we will talk further.
Ως θεής τα άπαντα στους φέροντας άπαντα. Λέξωση την εμή επιθυμίαν και ως αύριον υγιήσω της χύσεως εις τα σχήρα. Ως κατά.
Ότι ούν επιθυμείτε ο άνδρας και γυναίκες δύναμε φέρει νημή. Μην υφίστε επί το επιθυμητόν, ούν και βρίσκεται. Υπέ και ευρύσω. Έχομεν μάρμαρον πολύ στικτον, γύωθεν. Βλεψί, επί διασχιζούσες, ήον το σώμα. Είδα την αν δυνάμεων ανευρύνση, τα σκία είναι ωραία. Μηδενός αντιθύμους και συναρμόζιος πολύ συστάθεση το αμαξουστασίο.
Αμφιβολία, ναι.
Η εστιχία, συμπεριφαντάζομαι, έσεστε φουσία. Αλλά φωτών, έχετε πανηράσουν.
Πασχόμηλωνος βάση ίσως.
Επιθυμείς ορίζει να πει δύο ψυχερών, που γλυκάζουν.
Χαμήλιον δώρον εστί.
Για την επάγγελο, για τον άντρα κάλιον στην κρίνα η ρόδα. Μεγαλείον ίσως δια τη γυναίκα. Ή έλεον σφύρνας ίσως. Σφύρνας έλεον πιστεύω ότι ικανός δρυμίες. Θερμότερον και βαρύτερον θειοσμή και αλκυστικότερον τα μάλα είναι. Ακριβόν ή ευτελέστερον, επιθυμησιά.
Και τη μετευτελεία σε εμπορεύω με πολυτέλεια να πετώ.
Καμήλιο δώρον εστί. Αυτή η προσοχή είναι πλήξη.
Ημενέου δώρα περιθάηση. Μοίρα ή θείος.
Αλλά όμως τα μοίρα των άνθρωπων δείχνησε. Τούτο άδικον εστίν. Ακριβόν ή ευτελέστερον, επιθυμησιά.
Και τη μετευτελεία σε εμπορεύω με πολυτέλεια να πετώ.
Καμήλιο δώρον εστί. Ούς δύναμε πιστεύειν τούτο.
Ημενέου δώρα περιθάηση. Μοίρα ή θείος.
Αλλά όμως τα μοίρα των άνθρωπων δείχνησε. Εις φαντασίαν πλέον.
Πασχόμηλωνος βάση ίσως.
Επιθυμείς ορίζει να πει δύο ψυχερών, που γλυκάζουν. Ούφε μπροσί. Για την επάγγελο, για τον άντρα κάλιον στην κρίνα η ρόδα. Μεγαλείον ίσως δια τη γυναίκα. Κίνησε αυτόν. Ή έλεον σφύρνας ίσως. Σφύρνας έλεον πιστεύω ότι ικανός δρυμίες. Θερμότερον και βαρύτερον θειοσμή και αλκυστικότερον τα μάλα είναι. Βοηθής αμάρακος εγωσμίως σώσει. Ήστατη εμποδία θέλει λεξί. Αυτή συναρμόζει ως περιχείριον τες τελικά της γυναιξί. Έστι δέσμο σουκάρι αλεγιά. Η εστιχία συμπεριφαντάζουν έσεστε φουσία. Αλλά φωτών, έχετε πανηράσουν. Ποιος και με περιπέσει. Ακριβόν ή ευτελέστερο, επιθυμησιά.
Και τη μετευτελεία σε εμπορεύω με πολυτέλεια να
Ού
πετώ.
δύναμε πιστεύει καμήλιο δώρον εστί. Αυτή η προσοχή είναι πλήξη.
Ημενέου δώρα περιθάηση. Μοίρα ή θείος.
Τι στον κόρα κάνει να τον άνθρωπο δείχνεις.
Πασχόμηλωνος βάση ίσως.
Επιθυμείς ορίζει να πει δύο ψυχερών, που γλυκάζουν. Τούτο άδικον εστίν. Βοηθής αμάρακος ευωσμίως σώσει. Ήστατη εμποδία θέλει λεξί. Αυτή συναρμόζει ως περιχείριον τες τελικά της γυναιξί. Έστι έτοιμος φωκάρι, αλλά εξαρτή. Οι ευτυχίες, συμπεριφαντάζομαι, έσαστε μουσική. Ούν δύναμε πιστεύει τούτο. Έχετε πανηρά σου. Τούτο άδικον εστίνει.
Αμήλιον δοκιμασμός.
Για την επάμπεια. Για τον άντρα κάλυψε στην κρίνα η Ρώμα.
Piraeus, a peninsula southwest of Athens, became the city's main port after the politician Themistocles encouraged the development of its natural harbors. These developments led to the gradual abandonment of the older harbor of Phaleron. Piraeus's fortifications were further developed by Cimon and Pericles, along with the long walls which ensured goods could still be moved during sieges. Piraeus was divided into three main sectors: the military port, the Emporion, and the residential area. By the 5th century BCE, it had become not only Athens' naval headquarters, but also the mercantile center of the Mediterranean. Piraeus's development during the 5th century BCE attracted a large population. Many craftsmen, merchants, bankers, sailors, and ship owners moved to the port in great numbers. The population was a mix of Greek citizens, foreign visitors, and immigrants known as metics. The variety of the port's inhabitants gave Piraeus a cosmopolitan atmosphere. Most of the residents were involved in trade, but others worked on shipbuilding or in larger-scale industries like shield factories. Piraeus's commercial focus offered many opportunities for those seeking to increase their wealth and status. One such rags-to-riches tale is that of Passion, a slave who eventually became a citizen and earned a fortune thanks to his bank and his shield factory. Piraeus was a demi, or district, of Attica. Because of its size, function, and varied population, it had a much more complicated administrative structure than other demes. Above all, Piraeus was closely monitored and controlled by the Athenian assembly due to its importance to the city. Within the port, there were two separate categories of trade: international trade, which took place in the Emporion, and retail trade, which was managed by Kapoloi in Piraeus's agora. The Emporion was a commercial port dedicated to trading goods from overseas. All international transactions were required to be made within its limits and needed to be exclusively wholesale. Elected magistrates managed all business and laws in the port. Meanwhile, port authorities known as epimeletes oversaw trade and took care of the regulation of prices. This was an especially crucial duty, as the amount of supplies and goods could fluctuate wildly based on factors like bad harvests or lost cargo. Common products sold in the Emporion included vegetables, fruits, fish, leather, timber, marble, metal, weapons, and ceramics. According to Hermippos, Athens was also wealthy enough to afford the finest goods from all over the world, including figs from Rhodes, almonds from Thassos, oil from Samos, and wine from Chios. Taxes were collected on all merchandise that came into the Emporion, which provided Athens with a major source of income. After arriving in the Emporion, merchants set up samples of their goods in a display area called the Deigma. This was where citizens and foreigners gathered to officially make their deals, and almost all merchandise that came into the Emporion was traded within the area. The Deigma was under constant supervision by magistrates, who negotiated price control with the importers. They would occasionally give special privileges to those who agreed to sell at lower prices. These privileges ranged from tax exemptions to specially reserved seating in the theater. Piraeus was a deme, and as such was supervised by a magistrate called the Demarchos. While most demarchoi were chosen locally within their deme, Piraeus was appointed directly by Athens, so the city could better monitor its commercial interests. In fact, matters regarding the Emporion, the military harbour, and the grain trade were regularly debated and decided by the Athenian assembly. Transactions within the Piraeus were supervised by metronomoi. These were magistrates responsible for keeping track of weights and measures. They made sure merchants' measurements were always accurate to prevent bad deals and scams. Even though Piraeus would eventually develop into a city in its own right, it always remained under the control of Athens. A commercial tax of 2%, or a pentecost, was placed on all cargo entering and leaving Piraeus. The tax was collected by a group of 5 people called pentekostologoi. According to Andocides, this position could be bought for the hefty sum of 30 talents, or 180,000 drachmae. However, most of these officials made a profit of up to 6 talents, making the job very lucrative. While merchants were responsible for setting the value of their goods, pentekostologoi had the power to challenge the value, if they saw fit. Furthermore, merchants were required to register with these officials before they could transport, display, and sell their goods. Overall, this system provided Piraeus, and by extension Athens, with a tremendous amount of money. The sale of grain was overseen by special magistrates called sitophilakes. Since some Greek cities had a grain deficiency and relied heavily on imports, these officials were extremely important. Their duties encompassed all aspects of grain commerce, including price control and profit margins, to ensure Athens remained well fed. This is no surprise. Grain was so important to Athens that 2/3 of all stocks were required to be transported and sold at the city's agora by law. According to Demosthenes, the significance of the Sitophilakes was such that if they failed in their duties, they faced the death penalty. The Emporion operated on a foundation of credit and loans. Overseas commerce was handled by two types of tradespeople. Emporoi transported cargo in borrowed ships, while Naukleroi were ship owners who moved goods on their own vessels. Elsewhere in the Emporion were bankers and accountants who arranged loans and kept track of incoming and outgoing ships. Emporoi and Naukleroi financed their maritime voyages with these loans, which often had a high interest rate due to the dangers of sea travel. Emporoi used the loans to pay for both the cargo and the right to a ship, while Naukleroi only had to pay for their crew. Loans and interest were repaid upon a ship's return to port. However, in the event of a catastrophe such as a shipwreck, the merchant and ship owner were released from their obligations, and the losses were transferred to the lender.
You've returned. I hope you enjoyed your stroll through the port. Piraeus was important to Athens' commercial interests, but it eventually came into its own as a vibrant and bustling port. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. If you say so, let us see what you've learned, wanderer. First, a simple question. Which Athenian politician originally encouraged the development of Piraeus' natural harbors? Pericles did contribute to the port's development, but he was building off someone else's ideas. Try again. By the time Alcibiades was born, Piraeus was already a thriving port. Keep trying. Correct. Themistocles saw Piraeus' potential as a port and encouraged its development. On to the next question. What did the Sitophilakes supervise? It was metronomi who were in charge of Piraeus' weights and measures. Try again. Yes, Sitophilakes had the extremely important responsibility of handling all matters related to grain commerce. Only one question left. What was the name of the slave who took advantage of Piraeus' opportunities to earn themselves citizenship? What was the name of the slave who took... You're very... Prometheus was dry enough... Correct. Passion managed to earn a fortune and achieve citizenship thanks to both his bank. Your knowledge of Piraeus is impressive. Well done, Wanderer. Of course. Follow me, Wanderer.
Welcome, traveler, to the sanctuary of Asclepios, a place of rest and healing. This is the sanctuary of Asclepios, the god of medicine. It was here that the sick and weary came, seeking cures for their ailments. Sometimes the medical practitioners provided the cures, and sometimes the healing came from the gods themselves. This tour will help explain the inner workings of the sanctuary, as well as the unique way the Greeks approached medicine. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
Τι γίνεται? Τι τούτο είναι?
The ill and infirm came to this sanctuary to pray and offer sacrifices to Asclepios, the god of medicine. According to myth, Asclepios was once a mortal physician who eventually became a god. He had many sanctuaries across Greece, but the most famous was in Epidaurus. When pilgrims passed through the entrance of the sanctuary, they could read this inscription: "When you enter the abode of the god which smells of incense, you must be pure, and thought is pure when you think with piety." Medical steles constituted a sort of hub between medicine, religion, and the divine. They were slabs with inscriptions that praised Asclepios' virtues and merit, and described his methods of healing. The inscriptions relayed the dreams patients had within the abaton, one of the most important buildings in the sanctuary. The steles outlined the patient's name, their disease, and how they were cured by Asclepios. They were probably written by the sanctuary's priests, or at least under the priest's supervision. Asclepios was a complex deity. In addition to being a god, he was also a trained physician and disciple of the centaur Chiron. In ancient Greece, religion was inseparable from rites, processions, and sacrifices. This was no different in Epidaurus, and visitors to Asclepios' sanctuary needed to prepare themselves accordingly. Pilgrims cleaned themselves in order to be pure, then offered Asclepios food like honey cakes, cheesecakes, baked meats, and figs. The food was placed on the sanctuary's holy table, where it was presumably later taken by priests. After the preliminary offerings, visitors were allowed to enter the abaton, where they would hopefully encounter Asclepios in a dream. Medical steles also mention that healed patients sometimes gave additional offerings to Asclepios as thanks for being cured. Asclepios was originally born a mortal, and was the product of an affair between the god Apollo and a mortal, Coronis. Apollo killed Coronis after discovering she had been unfaithful, and ordered her body burned on a funeral pyre. However, he rescued his unborn child from Coronis' womb before the fire consumed her body. Apollo gave the baby to the centaur Chiron, who raised Asclepios and taught him to practice medicine. Over time, Asclepios became so skilled in the art of healing, he could even raise the dead. This angered Zeus, who sent Asclepios to Hades with a thunderbolt. Apollo retaliated by killing the Cyclopes responsible for making Zeus's thunderbolts. Then, Zeus revived Asclepios, making him immortal and deifying him in the process. In sculptures, pottery, mosaics, and coins, Asclepios was portrayed holding a staff intertwined with a sacred snake. The staff is a symbol of medicine that still endures to this day. The epitateon was the priest's residence. As the link between patients and the gods, priests were essential to the operation of the sanctuary. They were often elected into the priesthood for one-year periods, but could also buy themselves a position if they were wealthy enough. In addition to interpreting patients' dreams in the abaton, priests both supervised and performed sacrifices and rituals. During these functions, they were usually clad in white.
Βοτριόκος με οδηγέ των κομμών, ελθέ μακαρμίστες υβρίων και χαρημένος εή.
The abaton was built in the northern boundary of the sanctuary, where it surrounded a sacred well whose water was believed to have therapeutic properties. The abaton was where pilgrims went for incubation, or dream rituals. Details of the incubation ritual have been described in unearthed medical steles. They were also noted in Aristophanes' play Plutus, which featured a more comedic view of the process. Incubation was the dream ritual pilgrims experienced in the abaton. After completing the necessary preliminary rituals, pilgrims were allowed to enter the sacred building, where they lay prone. As they took in the smell of burning incense, the sanctuary's priests extinguished the oil lamps and asked them to sleep in silence. Once they were asleep, Asclepios would appear in their dreams and give his medical advice. The advice included diet and treatment recommendations, as well as requests for specific offerings or religious rituals. Upon waking up, priests interpreted the patient's dreams, unless a patient had been miraculously healed in their sleep. However, if a patient was completely beyond help, they were removed from the abaton. This was to adhere to a ritual law that stated that no one could die or be born within the building.
I see you've completed the tour. I hope you enjoyed your time in the sanctuary. As you can see, gods and miracles were just as important to the healing process as medicine was. Now, what else would you like to do? Very well. May your quest for knowledge be fruitful and fulfilling.